Ava's first night in the new apartment was shattered by an ear-piercing scream. It sliced through the stillness of the night, a raw, primal sound that seemed to vibrate in her very bones. She sat bolt upright in bed, heart hammering against her ribcage, as the echo of the scream faded into a suffocating silence. The clock on her bedside table glowed 3:03 a.m. The world outside her window was a void, the moon a thin sliver, barely casting light on the labyrinthine complex of the old building. Ava tried to convince herself it was just a nightmare, the stress of moving playing tricks on her mind. But as she lay back down, a heavy thud from the apartment above sent a new wave of terror coursing through her. She lay frozen, listening intently. The building was old, the walls thin, and sounds carried in unnerving ways. But this was different. It was as if the very air around her was charged with a malevolent energy. Ava's eyes darted to the window. The curtains, heavy and dark, fluttered slightly as though disturbed by an unseen presence. A cold breeze swept across the room, raising goosebumps on her skin. She hadn't opened a window, was sure of it. Summoning her courage, Ava slipped out of bed. Her feet touched the cold hardwood floor, sending a shiver up her spine. She moved cautiously toward the window, the floorboards creaking ominously under her weight. As she drew the curtains, a gust of wind greeted her, the night air unusually chill for a summer evening. The complex's courtyard, visible below, was bathed in shadows, the trees swaying as if in silent agony. Ava scanned the windows of the other apartments. They were all dark, lifeless, save for one. In it, she saw the faint outline of a figure, Mr. Cole, her neighbor. He stood motionless, his face obscured by darkness. Yet Ava felt his gaze on her, intense and unsettling. There was something deeply wrong about the way he just stood there, unnaturally still. She quickly drew the curtains and backed away, a sense of unease gnawing at her. The building groaned and settled, a symphony of creaks and whispers that seemed almost communicative. Ava tried to shake the feeling that the walls themselves were alive, watching, waiting. She crawled back into bed, pulling the covers tight. Every shadow seemed to twist into sinister shapes, every sound a whisper of dread. Ava closed her eyes, willing sleep to take her away from this waking nightmare. But sleep did not come easily. The night was oppressive, heavy with secrets and unspoken horrors. The scream echoed in her mind, a haunting reminder that she was not alone in this place. Something lurked in the shadows of the old building, something ancient and hungry, and it was just beginning. As dawn broke, casting a pale light through Ava's curtains, the horrors of the night felt like a distant nightmare. Yet, the unease lingered, a persistent whisper in the back of her mind. She rose, her movements mechanical. The image of Mr. Cole's silhouette etched into her thoughts. Venturing out into the complex, Ava noticed an oppressive stillness, as though the building itself was holding its breath. The hallways, usually echoing with the sounds of life, were now eerily silent. Doors that were often ajar, revealing glimpses of her neighbors' lives, were now firmly shut. As she descended the grand spiraling staircase to the lobby, a cold draft snaked its way around her, like invisible tendrils probing for something hidden deep within her soul. The lobby was deserted, the ornate mirrors on the walls reflecting a distorted, almost nightmarish version of reality. Ava's footsteps echoed hollowly as she walked, the sound too loud in the suffocating silence. She paused by the mailboxes, her eyes drawn to a series of missing pet notices pinned haphazardly to the corkboard. The number of missing animals was unsettling, their wide, scared eyes staring back at her from the photographs. As she left the building, a sense of relief washed over her. The fresh air a stark contrast to the oppressive atmosphere inside. The outside world seemed normal, untouched by the strange events within the complex. But as she walked, she couldn't shake the feeling of eyes watching her from the building's darkened windows. Returning in the evening, the building seemed to swallow her whole, the lobby's dim lights flickering as if to signal her unwelcome return. The whispers seemed louder now, voices murmuring just out of comprehension, emanating from the very walls. The elevator groaned as it ascended, its movements sluggish, like it was struggling against an unseen force. Ava's apartment welcomed her with a cold embrace, the air inside stale and heavy. That night, the screams returned, more desperate, more agonizing. A woman's voice filled with such terror that it rooted Ava to the spot, her heart racing. She could hear the sound of something heavy being dragged across the floor above, followed by a silence so complete it felt like the world had stopped spinning. The next morning, Ava's observations grew more disturbing. The hallways were not just quiet, they were barren. The neighbor who always greeted her with a nod was nowhere to be seen. The old lady who watered her plants every morning had left her balcony door closed, the plants wilting. Each day, the pattern repeated. More whispers, more screams, more silence. Ava felt a growing realization that something was very wrong. The building wasn't just old and creaky, it was alive with a malevolent spirit. The turning point came one rain-slicked evening. As Ava returned from work, her eyes caught sight of a dark, viscous liquid seeping slowly from under the door of apartment 12B. Her heart seized. Blood? No, it couldn't be. Panicked, she approached, the metallic tang of iron filling her nostrils. The liquid was too dark to be blood, but in the dim light it was impossible to be sure. Trembling, she dialed the police, her voice a mere whisper as she reported what she had found. The wait for the police was agonizing. The corridor seemed to close in on her, the walls whispering secrets she couldn't quite hear. When the officers finally arrived and broke into apartment 12B, they found only a shattered bottle of red wine on the floor. No sign of a struggle, no sign of the tenant. Ava watched, a sinking feeling in her gut, as the police shrugged off the incident. But as they left, she caught a glimpse of something in the apartment, a shadow that seemed to retreat into the walls, vanishing into the building itself. That night, as Ava lay in bed, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. They were voices, she realized. Voices of the lost, the trapped, the damned. And they were all around her, within the walls of the complex, a chorus of the damned echoing through the halls. In the days following the unsettling incident at apartment 12B, the atmosphere in the complex shifted imperceptibly, yet irrevocably. Ava felt it in the way the shadows clung a little tighter, the way the silence pressed in a little heavier. The building was no longer just an old structure. It was a vessel of unspoken dread, a mausoleum of lost souls. Ava's nights were plagued with a cacophony of eerie whispers that seemed to emanate from the very walls of her apartment. They were disjointed, a symphony of despair, voices overlapping in a language of suffering she couldn't understand but felt deeply in her bones. Sleep became a distant memory, her nights spent tracing the patterns of the whispers, trying to discern their meaning. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, sinister shadows through her apartment, Ava made a chilling discovery. The wall behind her bookshelf felt different. It was cold to the touch, colder than the surrounding plaster, and seemed to vibrate with a faint, almost imperceptible hum. Pushing the shelf aside, she found an old, discolored patch of wallpaper, hiding what looked like a small, crudely carved symbol, an eye with spirals for pupils. The discovery sent a shiver down Ava's spine. She traced the symbol with a trembling finger, feeling a jolt of energy, as if the eye was looking right back at her, seeing into the deepest recesses of her soul. It was a moment of connection, a fleeting bridge between her world and something ancient and unknowable. That night, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. They seemed to be coming from that symbol, a beacon calling out to the unseen. Ava lay in bed, her eyes fixated on the spot, feeling an inexplicable pull towards it. The shadows in her room writhed and twisted, forming shapes that were almost human but not quite. Grotesque mockeries of human form, stretching and reaching towards her. In a moment of panicked bravery, Ava approached the wall, pressing her ear against the cold surface. The voices were clearer now, a chorus of cries, pleads, and screams, each one a story of anguish. Among them, she discerned fragments of sentences, warnings. Beware the guardian, trapped in the walls. He comes at night. The next day, Ava's investigation into the complex deepened. She scoured the local library for any history on the building, finding a series of old newspaper clippings that spoke of mysterious disappearances, unexplained incidents, and a dark history that seemed to stretch back decades. Each article felt like a piece of a macabre puzzle, linking the complex to a tapestry of tragedies. But it was an old photograph that caught her breath, an image of the building from the early 1900s. In one of the upper windows, barely visible, was the figure of a man, his features obscured, but unmistakably similar to Mr. Cole. A cold realization washed over her. He was more than just a strange neighbor. He was a part of the building's dark tapestry, woven into its very fabric. Returning home, the building felt more oppressive than ever. The eyes of the portrait in the lobby seemed to follow her, the whispers more accusatory. In her apartment, the wall with the symbol seemed to pulse with a life of its own. The whispers now screams, the screams now a maddening cacophony that filled her head with images of despair and darkness. That night, as Ava tossed and turned, the walls began to change. The plaster cracked and groaned, stretching and contorting as if the building itself was alive, breathing, suffering. From the cracks, more symbols emerged, each one pulsating with the same eerie energy, creating a web of eyes that watched her, unblinking. Ava realized she was no longer alone in her apartment. She was a part of a living, breathing entity, a complex that was a prison of spirits with walls that held the echoes of the damned. And she was trapped within it, a witness to its haunting symphony. A symphony that was far from over. The haunting chorus of the walls escalated each night, but nothing could have prepared Ava for the harrowing experience that awaited her in the shroud of darkness. It was a night that would forever be etched in her memory. A night when the boundary between the known and the unknown was irreversibly blurred. As twilight descended, a sense of foreboding filled Ava's apartment. The air felt charged, heavy with anticipation. She lit candles, their flickering flames casting dancing shadows across the room, creating a macabre ballet on the walls. Then, without warning, the building plunged into darkness. The candles snuffed out as if by an unseen breath, leaving Ava in a suffocating black void. A surge of primal fear washed over her. In the impenetrable dark, the whispers of the walls grew louder, more frantic, as if the darkness had given them strength, a voice. Ava's heart pounded in her chest, each beat echoing in the silence. She fumbled for her phone, the screen's glow a meager beacon in the engulfing blackness. The air grew colder, a chill that seeped into her bones, a coldness that felt ancient, otherworldly. She shone the phone's light around the room, and that's when she saw them. The handprints, they covered the walls, overlapping, intertwining, each print a story of terror and despair, and among them, a message etched over and over in a desperate scrawl. Run. Ava's breath caught in her throat. The walls seemed to close in on her, the handprints almost pulsing with urgency. She knew she had to leave, to escape the suffocating grasp of the building. Stumbling in the dark, She made her way to the door. Her every movement felt watched, followed by unseen eyes. The hallway was no better. A tunnel of unending darkness, the air thick with whispers. The only sound was the echo of her footsteps, a staccato rhythm that seemed to quicken with her rising panic. The building groaned and creaked around her, an orchestra of dread that played with her sanity. As Ava approached the elevator, a low, dragging sound echoed through the hallway, a sound that chilled her to her core. It was close, too close, a presence that was tangible in its malevolence. She quickened her pace, her breaths coming in short, sharp gasps. The elevator doors opened with a groan, a narrow escape from the encroaching darkness. Ava stepped inside, pressing the button for the lobby with trembling fingers. As the doors closed, she caught a glimpse of a shadowy figure moving in the darkness, a figure that seemed to dissolve into the walls, becoming one with the building. The descent was agonizingly slow, the elevator shuddering and shaking as if in protest. Ava felt the weight of the building above her, a pressure that threatened to crush her very soul. The whispers were here too, inside the elevator, a chorus of voices that filled the small space with their mournful song. Then, with a jolt that sent her heart into her throat, the elevator came to a sudden, shuddering stop. The lights flickered, and for a moment, Ava was suspended in a limbo of fear and darkness, the whispers crescendoing to a deafening roar. The elevator lights flickered back to life, revealing the stark reality of her situation. Ava was trapped, caught in the grip of an ancient horror that lurked within the walls of the complex, a horror that was far from done with her. The power outage was just the beginning, a prelude to the terrifying revelations that awaited her. Trapped between floors, encased in the shuddering metal coffin of the elevator, Ava's mind raced with panic. The whispers crescendoed into a maddening cacophony, echoing the pounding of her heart. Every creak and groan of the elevator cable amplified her terror, each sound a sinister promise of impending doom. As the flickering lights cast ghostly shadows, Ava's eyes were drawn to the mirror at the back of the elevator. In the fractured light, her reflection seemed distorted, twisted into a grotesque caricature. Her breath fogged the glass, and in that mist words appeared, scrawled as if by an unseen hand. "He is watching." The elevator lurched back into motion, descending with a labored groan. Ava braced herself, her eyes fixed on the digital display, counting down each agonizing floor. The atmosphere was suffocating, thick with an unspoken dread. Finale, with a jarring thud, the elevator reached the lobby. The door slid open with an excruciating slowness, revealing the dimly lit, deserted foyer. Ava stepped out, every sense heightened, her skin prickling with anticipation. There, standing in the center of the lobby, was Mr. Cole. The light flickered over his features, casting deep shadows that made his expression unreadable. His eyes, however, burned with an unnatural intensity, piercing through the gloom straight into Ava's soul. "Miss Ava," he began, his voice a low, resonant timbre that seemed to resonate with the very walls of the building. "You've seen it, haven't you? The truth that lies within these walls." Ava's throat felt tight, her voice a mere whisper. "What is this place? What are those voices?" Mr. Cole's smile was thin, humorless. "This building is much older than you can imagine. It's a nexus, a point where the veil between worlds is thin. Those voices you hear, they are the echoes of trapped souls, prisoners of their own despair." The air around them grew colder, a chill that seeped into Ava's bones. Mr. Cole continued, "I am the custodian of this place, a guardian of sorts. These spirits, they are under my care." Ava's mind reeled. Why do this?" Mr. Cole's eyes flickered, a shadow passing over his face. "Every building has its secrets, its burdens. This one, it feeds on sorrow, on the anguish of lost souls, and I ensure the balance is maintained. Ava felt a surge of horror. You're keeping them here? Trapping them? In a way, Mr. Cole replied, his voice almost a whisper. But understand, it's not just them that are trapped. This building ensnares all who dwell within, including you. Ava's heart sank. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She was part of this twisted existence, entangled in a web of suffering and despair. Mr. Cole's figure seemed to blur, the edges merging with the darkness. Be careful, Miss Ava, there are far worse things than ghosts in these walls, and now you've attracted their attention. With those final words, Mr. Cole faded into the shadows, leaving Ava alone in the dimly lit lobby. The whispers returned, a haunting melody that seemed to mock her with its insidious chorus. As Ava stepped out into the night, the building loomed over her, its windows like watching eyes. She knew then that her nightmare was far from over. The building had claimed her, and escape was nothing but a fleeting dream. The elevator encounter was just the beginning of her descent into the hidden horrors of the complex. Ava's mind was a tempest of fear and disbelief as she stumbled out of the complex into the cold night air. The encounter with Mr. Cole had left her reeling, the revelation of the building's true nature weighing heavily on her soul. The whispers of the trapped spirits echoed in her ears, a relentless reminder of the unseen horrors lurking within the walls. She wandered the desolate streets, lost in thought, until the first light of dawn began to pierce the darkness. With a heavy heart, she realized there was no escape. The complex had ensnared her, its secrets intertwining with her own fate. Reluctantly, Ava returned to the building. The morning light did nothing to dispel the sense of dread that clung to the Gothic facade. Inside, the silence was oppressive, the air stagnant and heavy with the scent of decay. The whispers seemed to watch her, waiting. In her apartment, Ava sat huddled on her bed, her mind racing. The haunting truth revealed by Mr. Cole played over and over in her head. The spirits, their endless suffering, and the mysterious guardian. It was a nightmare from which there was no waking. As night fell, a desperate plan began to form in Ava's mind. She couldn't leave the complex, but perhaps she could strike a bargain with its keeper. If she promised to keep its secrets, to never reveal the truth about the spirits and their eternal prison, maybe then she would be allowed to leave. With determination fueling her steps, Ava made her way to Mr. Cole's apartment. The door creaked open at her touch, revealing a room shrouded in shadows. Mr. Cole was there, waiting, as if he had expected her. I know what this place is, Ava said, her voice steady despite the trembling fear inside her. And I know what you are. I want to make a deal. Mr. Cole's eyes glinted in the dim light, a hint of amusement in his gaze. And what could you possibly offer me? My silence, Ava replied. I'll never speak of this place or its secrets. Just let me leave. A moment of silence hung in the air, heavy with unspoken truths. Then Mr. Cole nodded slowly. Very well, but know this. The building does not release its hold easily. Are you prepared to face the consequences? Ava nodded, a sense of foreboding filling her. I'll do whatever it takes. Then it's done, Mr. Cole said. But remember, the spirits will know if you break your vow, and they are not forgiving. With the pact sealed, Ava hurried to the elevator, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and hope. As she pressed the button for the lobby, the elevator began its descent, a sense of finality enveloping her. But this was no ordinary journey. The elevator descended further than it ever had before, the numbers on the display blurring into an indecipherable mess. The lights flickered, casting erratic shadows that danced and twisted around her. Ava's stomach dropped as the elevator suddenly came to a shuddering halt, suspended in an abyss of darkness. The air grew colder, the whispers louder, and a sense of utter isolation enveloped her. Then, without warning, the floor of the elevator gave way and Ava was falling, plummeting into the unknown. The last thing she saw before blacking out was the twisted smile of Mr. Cole, his face a visage of malevolent triumph. When Ava awoke, she was in a different place, a room she didn't recognize. Disoriented and terrified, she looked around, her eyes landing on a chilling sight. On the wall hung a portrait of Mr. Cole, his eyes boring into her soul. Below it, a message written in a scrawling hand. "Did you think we would believe you?" The pact had been a ruse, a cruel game played by the keeper of the complex. Ava realized then that she was trapped in a new part of the building's twisted labyrinth, a prisoner of a pact that had sealed her fate. The complex had claimed her, and there was no escape from the echoes beyond the veil. Ava's eyes snapped open, her breath ragged, as she stared at the mocking portrait of Mr. Cole. The room she found herself in was unfamiliar, the walls adorned with peeling wallpaper, and the air thick with the musty scent of neglect. The dim light from a single flickering bulb cast elongated shadows that seemed to writhe on the walls. She rose unsteadily, her body aching from the fall. The realization that her pact with Mr. Cole had been nothing but a cruel deception was a bitter pill to swallow. She was not just trapped in the building, she had been thrust deeper into its malevolent heart. The room felt oppressive, as if it were alive and breathing around her. Whispered voices seeped through the cracks in the walls, their tone mournful and pleading. Ava approached the portrait, her fingers trembling as they touched the cold frame. The eyes of Mr. Cole seemed to follow her, filled with a sinister glee. "Did you think we would believe you?"